Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Pieter Dirksen performs as soloist on both harpsichord and organ Pieter Dirksen performs as soloist on both harpsichord and organ and as a continuo player with diverse chamber ensembles. He completed his musicological studies with honors in 1987 and since then published widely about Baroque keyboard music. In 1996, he received his doctorate cum laude with a dissertation on the keyboard music of Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck, which was awarded the Dutch Premium Erasmianum. Further books have been devoted to Bach's Art of Fugue, Sweelinck and Scheidemann, and critical editions appeared with music by Bull, Sweelinck, Cornet, Scheidemann, Düben, Buxtehude, Reincken, Lübeck, and Bach. Continuous research into the background and the sources of the music lend the performances of Pieter Dirksen a special quality. Pieter Dirksen is a member of Combattimento Consort Amsterdam, as well as the chamber music group La Suave Melodia. He appeared in most European countries, the United States and Canada, and regularly gives master classes in chamber music and keyboard playing. He taught at the organ summer academies in Haarlem, Göteborg, and Smrano, and is affiliated with the organ research at the Göteborg Organ Art Center in Sweden. As a soloist, he specializes in the rich 17th century North German and North European, particularly repertoire, as well as in the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Among his numerous recordings, the one devoted to the reconstruction of the earliest version of Bach's Art of Fugue and a complete recording of Sweelinck's keyboard music, in which he participated both as a player and musicologist, stand out in particular. The latter was rewarded the highest Dutch prize, the Edison. So in today's conversation, we talked about the keyboard and organ music by Sweelinck and Scheidemann, and we touched the subjects of Samuel Scheidt and Johann Adam Reincken as well, and in general about the musical scene in Hamburg in those days, as well as in Amsterdam. So I hope you will be so much inspired by this conversation. I know I will, because Peter shares some of the tremendously wonderful insights about how you as an organist of today can continue to further this Sweelinck's tradition, which is now 500 years old probably, and can learn from their techniques and apply them even in your service player as well in the 21st century. Let's go to the show. Peter, I'm so delighted that we're having this conversation live, and we first met in 2000 in Sweden, Gothenburg Organ Academy, and I heard this amazing performance of yours where you played the harpsichord and performed complete Art of Fugue. This was very, very intriguing and I would say revolutionary performance. So thank you so much for sharing your generosity and time and insights with us, and I hope people around the world will feel inspired. Thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thank you for your kind words, Vidas.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about your main area of expertise, probably. The thing that interests me the most is how you combined various periods of historical keyboard and organ playing. For example, 17th century, you are very much at home, and even 18th century, even earlier. You're such a great scholar where it comes in Sweelinck and Scheidemann as well. So I was planning to have this conversation about Scheidemann's organ music. Because Scheidemann is such a very colorful figure, and his music is or was not very well known among general organist circles, but it is not so today. Of course, I hope that Scheidemann is very much he has this prominent place in North German organ repertoire. How do you feel about Heinrich Scheidemann?
Well, of course, I came on his track and became more and more interested because of my big topic, Sweelinck. And I gradually had so much material. I've actually already gathered during my years of writing my dissertation on Sweelinck. So it was relatively easy to go on with him. And actually he's the most interesting pupil of Sweelinck, I find. There's not so much biographical material, but on the other hand there's so much music of him, which is really approaching the same quality as Sweelinck has in his music. So, but it's also very different in character. You can clearly see where he got his composition technique from. He was well informed, and Sweelinck is really behind his music, but still he had an independent mind, and he went his own way, which is very interesting. I think he has a very different character from Sweelinck in respects.
Yes, and Sweelinck, of course, they called Sweelinck the maker of German organist, right? Deutscher Organistermacher. So this title is sort of a legendary title for today's world, right? And what does it mean to be the maker of German organist in your mind, for example?
Well, Sweelinck just somehow got his reputation of being a fabulous organist, but what is also important, he had devised a system to compose very well for keyboard instruments, especially the organ. And this was one of the main attractions. It was not only the playing, because there were fine players around in more places, but this combination of being a top organist and also one who had developed a new kind of keyboard program, keyboard composition program, that was what attracted so many students, especially from Germany.
Mm-hmm. So yes, Sweelinck's music probably, since we are touching this topic, of course, we cannot really talk about or discuss Scheidemann without touching Sweelinck, right? Because they are very much connected. So before talking about Scheidemann's music and his style and compositions, let's touch a little bit where he got these ideas from Sweelinck and probably even beyond, right? So Sweelinck, this prominent figure from Amsterdam, Oudekerk, he started his ideas a very, very interesting way. He combined something, right? What are the main stylistic influences that Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck had on his music, for example?
Well, the main thing is, of course, is this new kind of keyboard polyphony. Sweelinck was very keen on writing something which had a kind of same polyphonic quality as had the great vocal tradition of the 16th century, the great Netherlands Franco-Flemish tradition, which is not entirely just because there were also many Italians and French composers participating in it. But still, this vocal tradition had come to an enormous mastery of counterpoint, and he wanted to try to create something equal. It was not there yet. Keyboard writing tended to be freer, to be more homophonic, but he wanted to achieve that same quality of polyphonic writing, which was hugely influential, and also very much so on a composer like Scheidemann.
Yes, so this polyphonic quality, which was probably more of a vocal quality, he picked up from what? From Italian sources, mainly from, I would say, Zarlino, right? what else he added? Probably these figurations, right? What these figurations come from? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's a mixture of different influences. Sweelinck was very well informed about Italian keyboard music of his time. You mentioned De Ruta, but all these Venetian composers like Padovano, Merullo and Gabrieli, he knew very well, intimately. And then he got his connection with the English school. And you can say that this keyboard music is, on the basis of what he knew about vocal polyphony, he's trying to combine these two main traditions into something new, and something very attractive. So he took the best features of both traditions and made out of it something very new.
Yeah, this vocal quality of his polyphonic works, especially for performed on keyboard, on any kind of keyboard, probably makes us performers want to sing this music, right? Not only play, but each melody is sort of very independent and very gentle and singable. Reminds me of melodies that Johann Sebastian Bach sometimes created, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. Now you mention the big name in organ. Of course, it's not thinkable without this achievement of Sweelinck. If you look at a fugue of Bach or a fantasy of Sweelinck, you see the same quality of line. There is no superfluous voicing anywhere. It's indeed always singable. Phrases are ended within voices, independent of each other, and that's very much also a quality of the keyboard music of Bach. And this really goes back to what Sweelinck made in the beginning of the 17th century.
Mm-hmm. And for people who are, for example, just encountering music of Sweelinck, what would you recommend as the first start to listen to or to play? For example, your opinion. It's really fascinating to hear.
Well, in the 100 or more years that Sweelinck has been played and recorded and everything, a few pieces stand out, and that's not without reason. I think of Manu's Leben hat ein End, which has this fabulous, very simple but very effective and affecting melody. And well, Sweelinck was really inspired by this melody, I think, and made a beautiful set out of it, which is really outstanding, especially in the period.
You're talking about the famous variation cycle, right? Mein junges Leben hat ein End. In English, Mein Young Life has ended, right? Basically, something like that. Do you know in which period of Sweelinck life did he compose this fabulous cycle?
Well, we don't know that exactly, but you can construct from a variety of indications that Sweelinck started to compose late, and that this work is from the middle periods of his composing. He started to compose when he was only 40 or 42. We don't know it exactly, but it must have been in the 17th century rather than the 16th. And he achieved mastery really quickly. There are no beginner's work in this. There's no primitive music. And this one is, I think, from his really his golden period of composing, when he composed also most of his celebrated vocal psalms, which is around 1612, 1613, I think.
Wonderful. And of course, you mentioned probably we should mention the chromatic fantasy, right? Fantasia chromatica. So, can you tell us a little bit about this fantastic work that lasts like over 7 minutes, right? And has so many polyphonic contrapuntal tricks and magical devices that a regular concert goer would probably miss, but we as performers probably adore this kind of intricacy, right?
Yes, and now you mention a piece which has really something special about it. even within Sweelinck's oeuvre. This piece really has a quality which listeners pick up easily, is my experience in concerts, because it is so perfect in construction. And somehow listeners sense that too. It's not only the players who can see the music and who have studied the structure and everything and are indulged in all these polyphonic mastery and stretty and everything. So the technical side is fascinating. The proportions are perfect, and these proportions you somehow sense as a listener. That's my experience, because it's made from one piece, this Fantasia. This is also very special because it's based on a purely chromatic theme, descending chord we call it, and this descending chromatic theme is actually the first time in instrumental music. Vocal music was sooner with chromaticism, especially in relation with certain kinds of text, of course, but in instrumental music, chromatic pieces tended to be experimental, just something a little shocking. And here it's integrated completely in the composition, and that's quite an amazing step in Western music, I think, which is inherent in this Fantasia.
This chromatic Fantasia, does this require a special kind of keyboard, with these additional split semitones, or not?
No, definitely not, because actually my idea is that most of the Fantasias of Sweelinck are written for organ, but there are a few exceptions. One of them is this one, because it is written for mean tone tuning. It needs this strong character of unequal steps, half-tone steps, for this chromatic character to come out, and also the chords. But then you of course need to tune your upper keys in one pitch. So the C sharp cannot be a D flat, it's C sharp only, and it's a pure on A, etc. But then on the organs you had always an E flat rather than a D sharp. But in this piece you need a D sharp. Definitely. So on a harpsichord, of course, you can easily tune that down, and then you have this D sharp, which gives the proper character to the piece as a whole. And there was also some other futures in this piece which point to the harpsichord, but most of the Fantasias are indeed for the organ, and then he avoids this D sharp really.
Well, you mentioned, of course, this great variation cycle, Mein junges Leben hat ein Ende, but many people associate Sweelinck with the piece, which probably is not by Sweelinck, Balletto by Del Granduco, right? Can you tell us a little bit the controversy? I remember writing an article about this Balletto, right? And you responded, "Oh, it's a beautiful piece, but sadly not by Sweelinck." That's how I remember. So please tell us a little bit about Balletto.
Yes, this I discovered while writing up my dissertation, because of course you have to deal with like the margin of the oeuvre, the margin where you have doubts about the authenticity of pieces. But in the case of Sweelinck, it is actually rather remarkable that there is a rather large repertoire of big pieces, like the Chromatic Fantasia or Mein junges Leben hat ein Ende, or many other ones, which are clearly by him, very well preserved, so there is no doubt about it. And this particular piece, Balletto della Granduca, is a very attractive piece. I don't discuss that, I won't argue about that. But it is not by him, because it's a very late source, and in this source you see pieces by Samuel Scheidt, another important pupil of Sweelinck, side by side with pieces by his master Sweelinck. And some of them attributions we know from other sources, so they are okay, but otherwise you think they got mixed up. And in one case you can prove that he mixed up attributions. And this is explainable because the source is from like 1670 or so. So Sweelinck was dead over half a century, and Scheidemann also for 20 years. So things were not so clear anymore. And if you compare Ballet della Granduca with the music of Sweelinck and Scheidt, it much more clearly belongs to the Scheidt style as Sweelinck. And Scheidt is a good composer, but rather different from Sweelinck, a bit more robust, less refined, but it has a quality of its own, and that you can see in this Ballet della Granduca. So, organist of the world, please play this piece under the name of Scheidt.
Okay, Samuel Scheidt will direct that. And of course, since you mentioned Samuel Scheidt, we cannot really dismiss his fabulous collection called Tabulatura Nova, right? And this particular Balletto del Granduca reminds me then with a piece from this Tabulatura Nova variation cycle called Ach du feine Reuter, right? Does it have any similarities to your mind too?
Yes, it's the same key, and the melody is a little bit related, and you see the same procedures. Balletto della Granduca is on a smaller scale, which I think added to its attractiveness, because it's fun to add to a recital, or it's just 5 minutes, and it's very effective. While Ach du feine Reuter is much longer, and of course also needs much more work and practice.
Sure. But nevertheless, both pieces are tremendously effective for organ music lovers of all ages, probably.
Agreed. Yes, Scheidt was very fond of Sweelinck's music. You can hear echoes of Sweelinck's music everywhere. He took often the same melodies to arrange, the same models, the same procedures, but seen from a German perspective, I think, his music.
Yeah, and of course, how about the music of Johann Adam Reincken, right? He's a little bit different figure from Scheidt, right? Different sensitivity, I would say. Even polyphonic treatment is a little sort of maybe more refined, right? So this is also the Sweelinck school, but what are the difference between Scheidt and Reincken's work, for example, in short?
Scheidt and Reincken's work. Yes, Scheidt published his Tabulatura Nova in Hamburg, which is very interesting, because you see echoes in the Hamburg organists, and there are several pupils of Sweelinck active in Hamburg churches at the time. You see that even in Scheidemann, though he was very independent and made it into his own thing. Reincken was definitely a pupil of Scheidemann and became his successor at St. Catharinen in Hamburg. It's a bit of a puzzling figure because so little music of his remains. For example, we know that he published some organ music at the beginning of the 18th century, but that has been lost. And he's really an Enkelschüler, so second generation pupil of Sweelinck. And what we have of him is a fabulous quality in these two chorale fantasias. I can recommend to every organist to practice and take on their repertoires.
So of course this second generation legacy of Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck continues throughout the North Germany, right? And of course it reaches the age of Buxtehude, right? Also through probably Reincken as well, but also a little bit of Weckmann and others, because Lübeck and Hamburg were very much connected to these circles, right? But Buxtehude is somewhat different from I would say these Hamburg circles, right? Weckmann and Scheidemann, right?
Yes, Buxtehude, that's of course a very important case because was the most popular composer for organ from the 17th century. If anyone plays something from before Bach, it's usually a piece by Buxtehude. And there is some sense to it because his organ music is very varied, so that makes sense. But it's very interesting to realize that Buxtehude cannot be anything else than also a pupil of Scheidemann. and he studied together with Reincken in Hamburg in the 1650s. But Buxtehude was like Scheidemann a bit in relation to Sweelinck. Picked up many things from Scheidemann. You can see it in his early works clearly reflected. They are a continuation, but he soon turned another way and made things differently. So he was really an independent mind. And I think that also is very typical of the Sweelinck school, that you have really original minds. And of course, from Sweelinck, there was a direct line to running to Bach. If you mentioned Reincken and Buxtehude, he knew them both personally, and he was a great fan of their music and of their organ playing improvisations.
Yes, these connections through Scheidemann, right, and Reincken goes forth into the next century, right, next 18th century, and Bach picked up visiting Hamburg a few times. It's amazing how Scheidemann learned the art from Sweelinck, and can you talk a little bit how he became independent from Sweelinck, right? Because he learned some basic polyphonic techniques, right? But he became so much independent in his own way, right?
Yes, very important is the background he has in Hamburg and the Hamburg organ. In the 16th century, around 1554, I think, Hamburg became an organ from the same builder as the organ in the Oude Kerk in Amsterdam, where Sweelinck was organist. So it was the same organ, almost a copy, made by Niehoff. So with 3 manuals, 3 divisions, Oberwerk, Hauptwerk and Requisitive. And then it's very important, the difference. While the Amsterdam organ had only a trumpet in the pedal, it had pull downs. In Hamburg, Niehoff constructed already pedal towers and had these pedals X-stops. So that was a requirement in Hamburg as an addition. So this idea of a very independent pedal comes from Hamburg and doesn't come from Sweelinck so much. From Sweelinck it was like an help, an addition for some confirmers lines, for example, but in Hamburg it had a much more important function, and that was incorporated into Scheidemann's music very much, because the obbligato pedal is very important, and that's a huge difference.
Right. So this Sweelinck style with much more refined manual techniques and just a few pedal obbligato parts probably helps us to play Sweelinck's music on any keyboard music, just using 10 fingers, right? But that's not the case with Scheidemann. You cannot really play Scheidemann's Fantasias or Magnificat cycles without the real pedal part division, right?
No, there are a few chorale settings by Sweelinck where you need pedal as well, but there are most of them you can only play on like a 1 manual organ or 1 manual harpsichord with no problem. This idea of making use of the organ very idiomatically, so that you use 2 manuals and then you can cross your hands and add a pedal to it, which also crosses, for example, the left hand. It's all a new element of color, which is very important.
So, talking about the pedal in Scheidemann's, for example, mind, was it like for Samuel Scheidt, who said pedal is like another hand, right? Like the third hand, or was it something even more developed for Scheidemann?
Yeah, but it's interesting. Scheidt says that, but he doesn't use it so much in that way. He basically still writes just for 2 hands without pedal, and then he says, well, you can use the pedal now and then, but you have to make that up for yourself. See, perhaps you can take out the Cantus line, sometimes the bass you can play on the pedal, but it's not part of the composition. He's still thinking very much in the line of Sweelinck, what he had learned in Amsterdam. But Scheidemann is much more original in that way, because he starts to think differently about organ composition. So he writes organ music which you cannot play on smaller instruments or on the harpsichord anymore.
True. You know what fascinates me about the works of Scheidemann is that his amazing echo effects between the manuals, right, which were written before in Scheidt's works and to some degree in Sweelinck's. But Scheidemann, what he does probably is so revolutionary. He explores all 3 or even 4 manuals available at the time in Hamburg.
Yes, that's of course an extension of this new thinking about organ writing, which is so important in the history of the music for our instruments. And this particular example of echo writing, of course, he had that from Sweelinck. Sweelinck wrote echo fantasias, but the echoes are usually only in one hand. What he does is combine everything. He makes echoes in both hands, simultaneously sometimes, but sometimes independently. And then he goes even further by adding pedal counterfirmers line to it, for example, in chorale fantasias. So then you have 3 different layers. And this kind of combination work, this ars combinatoria, it's very typical of Scheidemann's thinking. He draws things together and makes something new out of it.
For modern day organists who are working, for example, regular church positions, right, playing services and masses and other things liturgically, and they have to play some chorale or hymn playing in 4 parts like usual, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Can they learn something from Sweelinck as well? This disposition of parts where cantus firmus can be placed in any voice, right? Is it possible to experiment in today's world also? Do you think?
Well, in any voice, the tenor is very important. That's the thing which you should learn actually as an organist, not only to harmonize something in the top voice, but also, which was one of the main requirements of the organist, that they could harmonize 4 parts with the pedal playing a tenor line. You see, these melodies often just fit perfectly on the pedal board, on the pedal trumpet. So that was a basic requirement of these organists. And well, if they want to learn about Scheidemann's music, on the one hand you have smaller pieces which are very attractive, like the preambula, which are actually ideal liturgically introducing pieces, very well written. The smaller chorale settings, there are many of them, also smaller Magnificat settings are there. And then, if you are starting to get interest, because there's so much beautiful music there already, then you could go to Scheidemann's main achievements, so the top, so to speak, which are these large chorale fantasias. And there are also many chorale fantasias in the Magnificat settings, which are really beautiful pieces.
You touched the topic of Magnificat settings, and of course, anybody who tried to look at these cycles of 4 pieces, right, in 8 different church tunes or psalm tunes, basically would find some kind of systematic approach to choral writing, right? The first part. Can you elaborate a bit how these Magnificat settings are constructed?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that they are strongly tied to liturgical practice in Hamburg, which are these Vespers, where the Magnificat was the main liturgical chant, and these settings are made for alternation, singing and performance. But at the same time, they had also a representative function. They were not only liturgical music, but they were also something to demonstrate the organist's art. And in the case of Scheidemann, he tried to use every technique he had at his disposal into these 4 verses. of the Magnificat settings. So cantus firmus setting, indeed often with the pedal playing the tenor part. Fantasia, which are the most important verses, where you can use all kinds of different devices, especially also echo, but also very virtuosic right hand solos, you name it. Then you had a part which is like a fugue in later terminology, and then there was a part which was kind of concluding short verse, which was rather backward looking, which I find rather fascinating because Scheidemann looks like Scheidemann wants to say, I can write all this modern music, but I'm also very much tied to the tradition. And these last verses sound like Sweelinck modernized.
Wonderful description of these techniques hidden in these each of the four verses in the Magnificent cycles. You know what fascinates me? It's like a compendium of Scheidemann's polyphonic techniques, right? In fact, Karin Nelson wrote a dissertation, basically with the main thesis that these Magnificent settings might be used or might have been used as a teaching aid for improvisation. Do you agree with this?
Yes, completely. But you must realize that the whole organist art of Scheidemann and the circle was centered around teaching, improvising, and playing compositions and writing compositions yourself. So it was one flexible field what you were covering. And in Hamburg there was a big tradition of these Magnificat settings. Many must have been improvised, there's no question about that. So these Magnificat settings of Scheidemann might be a reflection of the best verses he had improvised, for example. And there is also a kind of development into it, which I describe in my dissertation. So they are both reflecting improvisation, but they are also reflecting composition in itself, which was the art which they learned from Sweelinck in the first place. Because it's not that amazing that Sweelinck got so many students from Germany. What is amazing, that so many of these German students are good composers, which cannot be a coincidence. What I learned was not only good organ playing improvisation, but also good composition.
True.
So this is all related to each other.
So our modern day organists who are listening to this probably should be also aware of the curriculum that Sweelinck's or Scheidemann's era organist had. They had what? They had not only to play, but they had to write, compose basically, and also improvise, right? So that's probably modern day organists should also be inspired to do as well, don't you?
Yes. Yes, and for example, these preambula, many of them are clearly based on improvisation models, which you can learn rather easily. That's my experience, and to some degree that is also for these chorale creations or these Magnificat creations.
Yes, wonderful. So when we talk about Scheidemann, you mentioned the Hamburg organ and its characteristics and how they different from the Sweelinck's and Amsterdam organ. Probably we should also talk a little bit about the way they notated music in the scores in those days, right? It was completely different from modern day notation, isn't it?
Yes, this Sweelinck tradition of, so to speak, composing organists had also this special feature of notation. Well, tablet notation is of course an old way of notating keyboard music, which was developed in the 15th century and had its greatest flowering in the 16th. But after the turn of the century, so after 1600, it went away very quickly. the new Italian interpolatura, the modern notation, so to speak, was fastly being accepted everywhere, including with Sweelinck, for example. He wrote on 2x6 lines, we know. So he was not into tablature notation. But his pupils had this German tradition of tablet notation, and they used it to define their craft, their special craft. For example, from Reincken we know that he thought himself as the highest musician in Hamburg. So not a cantor or the city music director, no, the organist it was. And he got the best paid job at the end. And Buxtehude, the same thing. So they considered themselves like a special class of musicians.
Yeah.
And because they were able to play very complex music, compose it and play it, and give it to their students. And the best way to protect this is to use this kind of secret code of tablature notation, which had died out in practice, and nobody else could do anything with it except this small circle of specialized organists.
Mm-hmm. And we should probably mention Johann Sebastian Bach. He was also aware of this notation, right, when he composed Orgelbüchlein at least.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we know now that Bach copied Bach's earliest manuscripts are copies of Buxtehude and Reincken in tablature notation. That was discovered a few years ago, which is an amazing discovery. And here you see that Bach was raised in this tradition as well. And when he needed this notation, for example, when he ran out of space, he used it, for example, in the Orgelbüchlein, this notation. There's also a very interesting early fantasia by Johann Sebastian Bach, which he wrote down completely in tablature notation, which I think is in the Andreas Bach book. And it is not so well known yet, but it's a beautiful piece. But it's a very special piece because he wrote it in tablature notation and there are no other copies. So he never gave it to his students. Well, his other music he gave freely, and this fantasia is in a kind of old-fashioned improvisatory style, polyphonic but improvisatory, and he wrote it down in the secret writing. So that's a very interesting example of Bach's dealing with this North German tradition, and he was really the last important representative of the tradition.
Mm-hmm. And this old North German organ tablature notation, I think, can we imagine that those days organists would more easily play from that notation than from Italian score?
I don't think so. No. This has also to do with this whole tradition of improvising, but also of memorization. And these scores, well, several, which are, I've seen many of them in German libraries, they are usually in impeccable condition. They were, I think, usually kept as archive pieces, which they consulted, but which they did not really play from it, is my impression. They learned it from memory, they consulted it to fresh up the memory, I think. They wrote it down very carefully, and it was kept as a kind of treasure from their teaching period, from their learning period.
And you are talking about the tablature notation now, right?
Tablature notation.
And what changed with the Italian notation? Was it easier to play this way for them? Or was it more fascinating?
During the Scheidemann, of course, could also read it, because he had learned it with Sweelinck, and we know now that he probably owned one of the Toccata books by Frescobaldi, which is the earliest sign of Frescobaldi in North Germany. So he played that already. It has a few pieces you see already Frescobaldi influence, and it becomes, of course, much stronger with Reincken and Buxtehude. They absorb it really into their organ music, and of course then you see that they could read it very well and learned that music from this notation.
Amazing insight. Today's organist probably would even have a hard time imagining how to read, how to even decipher, right? Can you give us a little bit of a hint how to do this in general terms?
Yes, you have to learn the peculiarities of the writers, but most of them are very neat. This has to do with this idea of that you write it down for eternity, to preserve in your collection and eventually give it to your student. So it is not easy writing to read. There are too many things to see while you are playing, I think. But it is actually great for archive reasons because it takes up so little paper.
True.
It is two or three times as economical as modern notation.
In Scheidemann's day, for example, the duties of organist in his city, in Hamburg, for example, what did the organist had to do? Play, write, improvise, write. What else? Did he have to accompany the choir or not?
Yes, they had to accompany the choir. That was one of the main requirements also. And it became more and more important. For example, in the Organistenprobe, the organist tests of Beckmann in 1655, it was required that he could play continue well. That was one of the jobs he had to do in this test. So that was also part of the organist's duty. And very important is also the idea that the choir was always present, and if it wasn't present in the church, the organist had to play the same piece as the choir.
Exactly.
So the church goers were expecting the same motet, but then from the organist. And of course, I could elaborate on it.
So what did Scheidemann and his pupils did in those days? Probably they took the open score notation, right, and they played intabulations, right, improvisations based on the texture of the motet. Can you describe the process, how it's done?
Yes, actually, I think they were used to accompany it from a figured bass part, for example, and then they heard it every year, every month, every Sunday. They heard these motets, so they were in their heads. They could just take the continuum part, put it on the organ, and play the complete motet, I think. And of course, they knew the lines so well that gave them much freedom to make figurations on it while they were playing it.
So you're saying that they're not playing from the open score, but rather from the continua.
That was not necessary. This open score. That's a modern theory, but I don't believe it because there were hardly any open scores. All these collections were printed in parts.
Parts, exactly.
So you had this bass part where you accompanied from, and after some years you knew these motets so well. You just needed this reminder of the harmonies, and you could play all these lines on top of them easily. That's my theory about it.
When you look at for example, Scheidemann's motet intabulations, the famous one, Verbo caro factum est, right? It reminds us of the famous motet by Orlando di Lasso, but it's completely different or very organistic, right? What specific organistic features does it take to create such a fabulous fantasia like this?
Yes, sometimes some of his motet interpolations stick pretty close. You can recognize the motets very well, but a few he turns almost into a chorale fantasia in itself, and you hardly recognize the motet anymore. So this process of knowing the motet and elaborating on it went very far. And this is also this combination idea of Scheidemann, who created this chorale fantasia already, and then he even combined it with motet interpolation, which is rather brilliant, I think.
And original motets, for example, by Lassos, by Hieronymus Praetorius, for example, these vocal pieces, were they famous for the churchgoers in their ears, or not so famous, do you think?
Yes, for example, he used some very well-known motets by Orlando di Lasso. I think they were just favorites in the church.
Favorites.
Yes, really.
And I'm thinking about the modern performers, for example, who are taking famous choral pieces or even famous tunes from the movies, films, right, from Hollywood, and try to do their own arrangements. But usually their arrangements, organistic arrangements, are rather dull, let's say, very much in the mode of the original, right? Maybe some kind of melody and register changed here and there, but nothing very creative about that. But if our modern day organist would be inspired to look at the techniques that Scheidemann did, don't you think that modern arrangements of vocal music and theater and film music would be so much more artistically pleasing?
Yes, I think so. These pieces give great models to use it yourself. But you have to be very familiar with the original, of course. I think these organists played these motets, then they replaced the choir, and then they got bored, of course, by these simple lines, because they are not so effective anymore. You don't have all these colorful voices mixing in a choir. You have to substitute for it. It's too simple in the organ, so you add figurations, you add different use of manuals, etc.
Well, Peter, I'm conscious of your time, of course, and I would talk to you for hours and hours, of course, if I had the privilege, but for the ending part of our conversation, do you feel that we are, as organist and keyboardist, continuing the Sweelinck tradition even to this day?
Yes, I think so, because the Sweelinck tradition more or less ends with Bach, but of course Bach is not an ending. It lives on. Even after Z, there are many organists who continue that tradition, and that of course was so influential in the 19th century when they rediscovered all his music, and then it became really big. And this organ art, especially the organ art using obbligato pedal, which goes back to this Hamburg tradition, really. So even if you play a symphony by Vierne with obbligato pedal, it goes back to Hamburg. It's really important to realize, because it had no tradition almost at all in any other country. So you can say this tradition is the basis of all 19th and 20th century organ music.
And of course the great organ reform movement, which was transferred not only in Europe but across Atlantic, and made huge influence in the art of organ building, right?
Yes, of course.
It comes from that time.
Yeah, the most famous name in organ building became the principal North German builder, which is Schnittger. So that is also enormous influence.
So wonderful, Peter. Can you let us a little bit into your world? Can you tell us what are your current projects right now?
Oh yes. Well, we are finishing with Breitkopf and Hertel the complete edition of Bach's organ music. There are now, I think, 7 volumes out already. So there are 3 more to go. So we are working on that. That's important. But I do smaller things on North German music. For example, 1 or 2 years, a volume of Buxtehude studies of mine will appear. But that takes some work still to do.
Any book you are writing about any organ subject?
No, only this volume of Buxtehude studies, which some articles which elaborate and add some new material to, so that will cover most of Buxtehude's music.
Wonderful. So, of course, our listeners are curious to know more about your work and what you have been doing. Can you give us a link online where they can find you and your work?
Yes, of course. I have the inevitable website, which is www.pieterdirksen.nl, Netherlands.
Wonderful. I'll make sure I'll include this link into the description of this conversation. So, Peter, you've been so tremendously generous with your ideas, and I hope that people from around the world will feel inspired to continue this Sweelinck tradition, and you are certainly the part of this legacy and continuing this. Thank you so much. Have a great health and amazing creativity ahead of you.
Thank you too, Pieter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pilkevičius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.